Semen retention is often misunderstood as merely the act of abstaining from release, but in truth, it is an ancient and powerful method of energy redirection. Sexual energy is among the most potent life forces a person possesses. It's the same force that creates life, yet in our modern world, it is routinely dissipated, drained, and wasted through compulsive habits, distractions, and escapism. What many fail to realize is that this energy doesn't simply vanish when not used for reproduction. It can be transmuted, converted into other forms of creative, mental, and spiritual power. When a man practices semen retention, he is not suppressing his desires. He is reclaiming that energy and choosing to channel it upward, into ambition, purpose, discipline, and focus. Discipline and focus. This shift doesn't happen automatically. It requires intention, but the body and mind respond. The retained energy begins to fuel heightened states of awareness, increased vitality, and a deeper drive toward meaningful action. What once leaked out in moments of fleeting pleasure now becomes available for long-term fulfillment, mastery, and transformation. The first 7 days of semen retention are often underestimated in their intensity, yet this initial phase is where the foundation is laid for everything that follows. It is a period of internal chaos, detoxification, and raw confrontation with the self. On the surface, it may appear to be about abstaining from one physical act, but beneath that surface, a psychological and energetic transformation is already underway. This is not just about breaking a habit. It's about disrupting a deeply embedded cycle that has defined a man's relationship with his own body and mind. During these early days, the nervous system begins to recalibrate. For men who have conditioned themselves to rely on frequent ejaculation, whether through casual sex, pornography, or habitual masturbation, the body and brain have adapted to a near-constant flood of dopamine. This overstimulation dulls the senses over time, creating a loop where more stimulation is required just to feel baseline satisfaction. When retention begins, the system is suddenly denied its usual reward, and the brain's dopamine pathways start to protest. This protest can manifest in many forms. Intense cravings are common, not just for sexual release, but for any form of distraction that can mimic the dopamine high. Some men experience irritability, mood swings, or even physical symptoms like headaches or muscle tension. Sleep patterns may temporarily change. Focus can become erratic. The body is purging dependency on short-term pleasure, and like any detox process, discomfort is a sign that the system is trying to heal. The nervous system is shedding layers of numbness and dependence, which makes the first few days feel like an emotional roller coaster. At the same time, psychological resistance surfaces. This is when a man's mind starts to rationalize relapse. What's the point? I've gone long enough, or I'll start again tomorrow. These thoughts are not neutral. They are protective mechanisms designed by the ego to maintain comfort and familiarity. What's being threatened here isn't just habit, but identity. If a man has used sexual release as a way to soothe stress, fill emotional voids, or escape from uncomfortable truths, then removing that outlet leaves him face to face with what he's been avoiding. This avoidance often includes unresolved emotions, loneliness, guilt, fear, boredom, even grief. Without the fog of constant stimulation, these emotions begin to rise to the surface. While this can feel overwhelming, it is also a critical part of the detox process. Many men carry emotional pain they've never truly acknowledged, masked by years of habitual self-soothing through pleasure. During the first week of retention, that emotional backlog starts to move. It becomes clear that sexual energy isn't just physical. It's deeply connected to the psyche and the heart. There's also a strong spiritual dimension to this phase, even if a man doesn't initially recognize it as such. As the body retains what it's used to expelling, energy begins to accumulate. This can lead to moments of heightened awareness, sensitivity to the environment, vivid dreams, or even surges of confidence and primal energy. These sensations are unpredictable and inconsistent at first, but they hint at the power that is being restored. The body is no longer in a state of depletion. It's entering a phase of conservation and regeneration. Another key aspect of this detox is the re-emergence of masculine drive. In a culture where masculinity is often dulled through overindulgence, passivity, and distraction, the first 7 days can trigger a return to a more grounded sense of power. There's often a subtle shift in posture, tone of voice, and eye contact. It's not aggression or dominance, but a reawakening of inner control. This is a man beginning to reclaim his attention, not just externally, but inwardly, toward his purpose, his values, and his unresolved inner world. By the time a man reaches day 30 of semen retention, a noticeable transformation has often begun to take root, not just in the body, but deep within the mind. The storm of the initial detox phase has usually subsided. The urges that once felt uncontrollable begin to lose their grip. For the first time, many men experience what can only be described as mental clarity, a sharp contrast to the fog that once blurred their thoughts, dulled their focus, and distorted their priorities. But this clarity is not just a psychological relief. It's the natural result of hormonal balance, nervous system recalibration, and energy being rerouted back into the higher centers of awareness and cognition. The brain, now freed from the constant bombardment of artificial dopamine spikes, begins to reset its reward system. Activities that once felt dull or meaningless, reading, deep conversation, exercise, or creative work, start to become genuinely enjoyable again. This isn't because the activities themselves have changed, but because the overstimulation that had numbed the brain's sensitivity is no longer present. The baseline level of motivation begins to rise. Tasks that once required willpower now flow with less resistance. Many men report improved memory, faster thinking, and a newfound ability to concentrate on one task for extended periods without needing to check their phone or look for a distraction. With this clarity comes a sharpening of self-awareness. Patterns and behaviors that were previously automatic become visible. One begins to recognize subtle addictions, unconscious choices, and emotionally reactive habits that once passed unnoticed. In this light of awareness, self-deception becomes harder to maintain. The mind starts to organize itself around what is meaningful, rather than what is easy or stimulating. The ability to observe thoughts without immediately acting on them grows stronger. This internal observer, once buried under noise, begins to lead. Decision-making also becomes more decisive. Without the hormonal highs and lows that come with constant release, a man finds himself more emotionally stable. He no longer swings between extremes of false confidence and sudden shame. He becomes more difficult to manipulate, less reactive to emotional triggers, and more aligned with his long-term goals. He starts to act from vision rather than impulse. Choices that used to be driven by fear of missing out or social validation begin to shift toward alignment with inner values. Whether in relationships, career, or personal development, clarity of mind brings clarity of direction. Physical posture and non-verbal communication also start to reflect these mental shifts. There's often an unconscious straightening of the spine, more deliberate movement, and steadier eye contact. These aren't forced behaviors. They emerge naturally when the mind is no longer fragmented. With clarity comes confidence, but not the loud, performative kind. It is quiet, grounded, and still. It does not seek attention. It simply exists as a byproduct of a man being in alignment with himself. There is also an increased capacity for solitude. Many men who reach this point report that they no longer feel the same need to chase external validation. The need to constantly be around people, to seek attention, or to distract themselves with social media fades. Time alone becomes valuable, not lonely, but rich with reflection and inner dialogue. This is not isolation, but recalibration. A man who begins to enjoy his own company becomes less dependent on the world's approval. Even relationships with women begin to change. Rather than approaching from a place of neediness or unspoken agenda, a man starts to see women more clearly, not as objects of validation or pleasure, but as human beings to engage with authentically. This shift alters dynamics. Attraction becomes more natural, more mutual. A man grounded in his own clarity becomes magnetic, not because of anything he says or does, but because of who he has become without the noise of compulsion controlling him. By day 60 of semen retention, a man begins to experience changes that extend beyond his internal world. The earlier phases, marked by detox, resistance, and mental recalibration, have created a foundation of self-awareness and energy stability. Now that inner transformation begins to ripple outward, affecting how others perceive him, how he navigates social environments, and how he relates to something deeper than logic, a spiritual force, a presence, a pull toward meaning. This is the stage where a man's retained energy stops merely accumulating and begins to radiate. One of the most striking shifts reported around the 60-day mark is a change in social presence. People start to respond differently, often without understanding why. It may be something in the way he carries himself, calm, focused, grounded. His eyes have more intensity. His voice becomes deeper, slower, more deliberate. These are subtle cues, but humans are sensitive to energy. When a man is no longer leaking his life force through compulsive habits, his body language changes. He enters rooms differently. He doesn't need to assert himself. His mere presence does it for him. Conversations begin to change as well. There is less interest in shallow, small talk and more pull toward meaningful connection. The clarity developed in earlier stages sharpens communication. A man speaks with intention, not to impress, but to express. He listens more deeply. Social anxiety, once fueled by self-doubt and inner instability, begins to dissolve. Confidence becomes natural, not performed. It is no longer something he tries to project, but something that simply exists, built on weeks of self-respect, discipline, and inner mastery. Another major shift is in how women respond to him. By this point, the magnetic quality that many associate with semen retention begins to surface. But it's important to understand that this magnetism has less to do with looks or charm, and more to do with energy. When a man is no longer chasing women, when he is no longer ruled by sexual impulses or craving validation, he becomes infinitely more attractive. There is a certain tension in his gaze, a weight in his energy, a mystery in his silence. He no longer seeks attention, and paradoxically, this makes him stand out even more. But the deeper transformation isn't just social, it's spiritual. By day 60, many men report moments of profound introspection, even transcendence. There are instances of stillness that feel sacred. Dreams become more vivid, intuition sharpens. A connection to something higher, whether it be purpose, God, nature, or the soul, starts to awaken. This isn't religion, it's resonance. It's a sense that life has deeper layers, and that his energy is part of something greater than personal gratification. At this stage, creativity also expands. That same energy which once cycled through lust and release is now available to fuel art, business, movement, leadership, invention. Ideas flow more freely. Vision becomes long-term. What once felt like a scattered sense of self becomes a clear direction, and with it, an urgency to build, to create, to contribute. Retention is no longer about withholding. It becomes an act of channeling. Relationships, both romantic and platonic, begin to mirror the man's growth. Boundaries become clearer. There is less tolerance for inauthenticity, for toxic dynamics, for situations that drain energy rather than add to it. The man becomes more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for what he's cultivating. He starts to protect his energy with care. He values his time, his focus, and his space because he understands their connection to the life force he is learning to master. This period is also when solitude deepens. Silence no longer feels empty. It feels full. He is no longer avoiding himself. He is meeting himself. There is less chasing, less noise, less pretending. In that space, a man begins to sense his own depth, a force that cannot be explained but only experienced by the 90-day mark of semen retention. Something profound happens. The man is no longer fighting his urges, suppressing his instincts, or wrestling with identity. Instead, he begins to embody a quiet and complete integration of his masculine energy. What began as a discipline has now become a state of being. The compulsions, the cravings, the psychological noise that once clouded his clarity have been replaced by a deep-rooted calm. He no longer feels ruled by his impulses. He feels sovereign, grounded in his body, present in his mind, and anchored in his purpose. At this point, the energy that was once constantly drained through release has been fully internalized. It has built strength in places most men don't even realize they've neglected, not just in muscle or productivity, but in character, in patience, in spiritual depth. He has spent 90 days holding on to something the world taught him to waste without thought. Now that energy has become his own. It is no longer something he needs to protect from the outside world. It flows within him as a natural part of who he is. This stage marks a significant shift in identity. Early in the journey, men often identify with the struggle. I'm trying to retain. I'm resisting temptation. I'm on day X. But by 90 days, the retention practice is no longer a daily battle. It has become a natural expression of who he is. His relationship with pleasure has changed. He no longer sees himself as deprived or disciplined. Instead, he sees himself as someone who chooses to master his energy rather than be mastered by it. This is not suppression. This is transformation. A man at this stage often carries a level of presence that is unmistakable. He doesn't need to prove anything, explain himself, or seek approval. His stillness speaks louder than his words. His focus is sharp, and his attention is undivided. There is a deliberate quality to his movement, to the way he engages in conversation, to the way he makes decisions. He has grown used to operating from inner stability, not external stimulation. His emotions have matured, not because he has avoided them, but because he has faced them without flinching. Sexual energy, once a source of distraction or confusion, now becomes a tool, a fuel for creativity, spirituality, and connection. If he chooses to be celibate, it is a conscious act, not one rooted in fear or repression. If he chooses to engage sexually, it is with awareness and presence, not compulsion. The way he is no longer enslaved to desire. He has reclaimed authorship over his own instincts. His sexuality becomes integrated, part of him, not above him. This masculine integration also begins to show in his mission. The energy that has been building for 90 days seeks expression, not just in self-discipline, but in creation. There is often a strong drive to build something lasting, a business, a craft, a legacy. He wants to channel his strength into something meaningful. The fire that once burned in hidden lust now fuels vision and execution. He becomes less reactive to obstacles, more strategic in thought, more consistent in his action. He is no longer scattered. His energy is concentrated like a beam of light, focused through a lens. Interpersonal relationships deepen as well. He no longer seeks relationships to complete him, but to expand him. He becomes capable of leading without dominating, loving without clinging, speaking without pleasing. He no longer fears solitude, nor does he resist connection. His masculinity is no longer brittle or performative. It is solid, quiet, and unapologetically whole. People sense it, not just through what he says, but in how he listens, how he holds space, how he moves through the world without needing to be noticed in order to be respected. Discipline is often misunderstood. To many, it sounds like restriction, punishment, or a denial of pleasure. But in the context of semen retention, and in the deeper journey of masculine development, discipline is not a cage. It's the key that unlocks the door to a deeper kind of freedom. Not freedom in the shallow sense of doing whatever one feels like, but freedom in the profound sense of not being ruled by anything, especially not by one's lower nature. True discipline is not about limitation. It's about liberation from compulsion. At first, semen retention feels like a practice of saying a no. No to lust, no to impulsive release, no to comfort. But with time, something shifts. The no that once felt like resistance begins to make space for a deeper yes. Yes to clarity, yes to direction, yes to strength, yes to control over one's own mind and body. The man who once gave in to every desire begins to realize how often his so-called freedom was just slavery to short-term pleasure. What he thought was choice was actually a deeply conditioned reaction to boredom, loneliness, stress, or emotional discomfort. Through retention, he slowly becomes aware of the gap between stimulus and response. Where once he acted without thinking, now he observes. Where once he chased fleeting gratification, now he holds steady. He begins to see that discipline isn't a wall. It's a mirror. It's a mirror. It shows him who he really is when no one is watching. The battle with lust becomes a training ground for mastering the mind itself. And this mastery does not end at sexual energy. It spills over into every area of life. A man who learns to delay gratification in one domain begins to carry that strength into others. He becomes more focused in his work, more resilient in hardship, more stable in relationships. He doesn't need motivation to act. He acts from principle, from vision, from inner alignment. He wakes up when he says he will. He trains when it's inconvenient. He speaks with intention. He no longer waits to feel like it. He simply does what must be done. This is not because he's suppressing something. It's because he's become something. It's because he's become something. Discipline has become his nature, not his burden. There's a paradox at the heart of this process. What starts as restriction leads to expansion. The more a man governs his instincts, the more space he creates for his higher faculties to emerge. His mind becomes sharper, his creativity richer, his spiritual awareness more tangible. When energy is not being lost through constant release, it begins to accumulate, not just in the body, but in the mind and soul. What was once scattered becomes focused. What was chaotic becomes ordered, and in that order the man discovers an internal freedom that most never taste, the freedom to choose his path, to remain unmoved in the face of distraction, to stand in the full force of his potential. This freedom is not loud or boastful. It is calm. It does not need to announce itself. It does not require validation. It is the quiet power of a man who has faced his own weakness, who has confronted his shadow, who has stood in the fire of his own desire and emerged stronger, not because he denied it, but because he learned to direct it. He is not numb. He is fully alive. But his aliveness is no longer dependent on stimulus. It comes from within, from alignment, from the discipline that has become his structure, his sword, his sanctuary.